we do, it looks like we've got 5 advisory members on now, so we do have a quorum. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's 7:03 p.m. This is the Sherborn Advisory Committee public meeting for Wednesday, March 3rd. Before we start, can I get one of the advisory members to volunteer to take minutes? Nobody. Here's Jane.
I can do it.
Thank you, Brendan. And I apologize. I took minutes last week, but I haven't sent them around yet, so we'll have to do that next week. All right. So first, I'm going to. I've opened the meeting. Roll call. We have myself, Stephen Tsai, Brendan Daly, Wasim Basli, Jane Matarazzo, Dhruv Kashal, Natalie Weir, and Mark Albers. I know that Steve Leahy is going to miss this meeting, and I don't see Peter yet. So I don't know if one of the advisory members, could you shoot Peter a text message or something, if possible? I'm sure he remembers that there's a meeting. All right, so first reading of the agenda. We have addition of topics not anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance. I have no topics. Does anybody else from advisory have anything to add to the agenda?
Not me.
Nope.
All right, hearing no additions. We will then have liaison reports. And then we have the 2021 annual town meeting warrant article presentations. This is going to be the first of 2 meetings to cover all of the warrant articles. Today we will have, and we're covering capital items as well. So today we are covering the fire department command vehicle and the fire department hoses. That's going to be Zach Ward, the fire chief. Then we have police department cruisers, which is Dave Bento, the interim police chief. Then we have amendment of the general bylaws regarding dog registration and licensing. That will be Jackie Morris, the town clerk. Then feasibility study for the senior center, which will be Sue Kelleher, the director of the COA. And then the Jake break prohibition, which it's a little bit unclear to me who is actually sponsoring that article, but I know that Steve Constantine is involved with it, as well as the select board. Then we have amendment to the open space bylaw. So that would be Gino Carlucci, the town planner, along with Mary Neutra, the chair of the planning board. Then we've got, and then some of the finance one, the supplemental appropriations, revolving funds, and stabilization funds, and that will be sort of just advisory, talking with Sharon about those, just based on what information we have. Then we will have approval of the previous meeting minutes, and then that's it. Does anybody have any problems or questions about the agenda? All righty. So I think we'll move on then to liaison reports. Does anybody? Oh, hello, Peter. Welcome. Does anybody have any reports from your liaison committees?
Steve, I'll give an update on the capital budget committee.
Great, thank you.
We met twice last week, and we got through most of the budgets, buildings and CM&D or DPW were the ones that we were last working on, and Sean's up for the next meeting on the 11th.
Great. Are there, as far as you're aware, Peter, are there any additions or removals from the capital list, you know, as of the current draft town meeting warrant?
The unknown one is really the recreation for the
Okay,
fields, and
Sure.
so that's a big number.
Okay.
Besides from that, no.
Okay. Great. Then I think we're ready to move on to our warrant article presentations. So first off, we have the fire chief to discuss command vehicle and hoses. And Zach, do you have something to share on screen?
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen, and I know that you kind of challenged us to keep it within 5 minutes, so I'm gonna try.
Yeah,
Sometimes
today it doesn't have to be, but
I
in
know.
the public hearing and in the town meeting, it will have to be, so.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share my screen. I have 2 items. The slideshow presentation really only addresses the command vehicle, just because that's a little more complicated. There's more information involving that article. So I'm gonna share my screen. The host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Did I? How do
I actually might have the ability to fix it if this is the town account.
Oh,
See, I tried this on my own Zoom account, before on this computer, and it worked, but
all right.
it doesn't really
Give it a
work.
try now. I believe I've turned on screen sharing for everybody.
There we go. Yep, it's definitely not. Yeah, it looks like it's going to work. Okay. All right. That's not it. There we go. Okay. So again, this is pretty brief. It's about 8 slides, and this really just covers the command vehicle.
Zach, I still only see your Zoom website.
Okay.
Window.
It says I'm sharing now.
But the all I'm seeing is your browser window.
Okay.
Zach, you have to stop share and then reshare when you
Okay.
have the file open.
As you can see, I don't share a lot. So no, I don't know why it's going to share this and not the hold. Just give me 1 second. I apologize. I've never shared on a Mac, so this is just a little different.
You should be able to just close that window out.
Yeah, I just tried that.
See that red dot in the upper
Yep.
left. So
There we go. I think I got it now. So
all
all right. Are we
There
all
we
right?
go.
Now I know for next time. So thank you, and I'm sorry about that.
That's why we practice this.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So basically, the fire department just says we have 2 capital requests this year. Our 2 requests are for a command vehicle and for replacement of hose. Again, this slideshow only really covers the command vehicle, and then we'll talk about the hose. Our total request for this year is $82,000. Our capital plan originally called for $297,000, but through grants and some other programs, we were able to lower that number significantly, which we're certainly happy about. So you may have seen me driving this truck around town. Some people call it the war wagon or the battleship or something like that. So this vehicle was bought, I think in 17 or so. It is a model year 17 Ford, although it was produced in 16. It was on the road in 16 as a demo vehicle. This was purchased by the town about 4 years ago now. The slide says 3 years. I actually made the slideshow in 2020. So after a few years of use, we've seen some real issues with the use and the operability of this vehicle. So that it's a crew cab truck with an extended bed. So as it sits right now, it's 22.5 feet long. To use the command system in this vehicle, you actually have to take a unit. I have a photo that'll come up and slide it out of the bed in the back. So to set up this vehicle and use it as a command post, it actually takes up 31 feet of space, which is, it's kind of a big area at an incident. One of the concerns that we have with this is the fuel usage. It gets between 9 and 10 miles per gallon. And as we get into the photos, I'm going to show you, it really doesn't have a mean of cover in bad weather. It's really, the command system in that vehicle is not designed for a single person to operate, which is what we usually have. And the last point there is it's one of the largest fire chief driven command vehicles in New England, if not the largest. It's quite big. So this is actually an advertisement photo for the actual vehicle that our vehicle. So that is actually our vehicle in the ad. So as you can see in the back there, in order to effectively use this as a command station, the whole unit slides out. And when it slides out, as you can see there, it's not covered up. And this actually posed a challenge for us at an incident we had on, I think it was June 27th. We had a 2-alarm fire incident over on McGregor Road. We had a lightning strike that in a subsequent power surge that affected like 16 houses. It was a little crazy. And, I'm there and I go to pull this thing out to use it, and it's pouring rain. And I'm like, it's just not going to work. It's going to fry the radios, or, and you can't use the whiteboard in the rain. It's just crazy. The other issue is the accountability board, and this is on the right, that whiteboard, and the radios are back, towards the left. So it's kind of hard to stand there and then use the more powerful radio that's there. That's why they're there. It doesn't really work that great. The radios in this aren't Motorola. They've been tough to work on. They're kind of an off-brand radio. And we've actually had some other electrical problems with this rollout unit. So what we're looking to do is replace it with something a little smaller and a little more basic. It's basically what all fire chiefs in our area are buying right now, and that's the Chevy Tahoe. That vehicle would be just 17.5 feet long compared to about 21.5. And then the big piece for us is when you use the command system in a Tahoe, all you're really doing is opening the hatchback. So you really only need about 20.5 feet of space. It's going to do double the fuel mileage between 18 and 20. And then again, with the hatchback open, and if you're running an incident, you're covered from the weather. And it is easier for one person to use. That's kind of what that would look like. So it's a little smaller, again, a little easier to manage. And like I said, it's undercover, which is kind of a big deal. We do have a lot of incidents in inclement weather. It's just the nature of our job. So this is just some of the numbers on this. So the cost of the new vehicle is estimated at $45,000. We estimate the sale of the old vehicle at about $30,000. The most conservative number we could go with is $24,000 for a trade-in. However, if we put this out to auction, I think it will do a lot better than that. The Kelly Blue Book of that truck is actually higher than the $30,000. So again, say we get $30,000, the cost is $45,000. The true spend on the town's part is $15,000. We expect the vehicle to last about 10 years. If you take the $15,000 divided over the 10 years, it comes out to $1,500 a year. And we actually estimate saving about $2,300 to $2,400 in fuel every year. So there's sort of a net savings on the vehicle. That actually concludes my slide presentation. All right, and I think I stopped sharing my screen, right? Yes, okay. So that concludes the presentation on that. Be happy to, I don't know if you want to break these up, Steve, and do one at a time, or how you want to do it. I don't know if you want to.
Why don't you, can you just tell us about the hoses, and then
Yeah,
when you're
so the
done,
hose is simple,
we can
right?
ask you
So
about both.
as you know, we're in OSHA state. We've been in OSHA state since February of 19. But even before that, we had a decent testing program for our hose where we bring in an outside vendor and they test it to the NFPA standard. There's actually a lot of liability in fire hose where fire hose can burst at a fire or burn through. So, it's very important that we have hose that can pass the test and function. So 2 years ago, we lost 4,500 feet of fire hose during the test, which is the most that company's ever lost in a single test. And they're out of New Jersey, and they do these tests all over the East Coast. So we got that award from them. We're able to replace some of that hose when the town purchased engine 2 and engine 6, because there were some hose costs factored into purchasing those vehicles. And then you fast forward to this past October, we lost another 1,600 feet of hose. And honestly, I'm surprised we didn't lose more. The hose that we're looking to replace, which is the supply hose that goes from the hydrants to the trucks, is like 30 years old. Some of it was actually donated from Massport, the Logan Airport Fire Department, like 25 years ago, because they switched sizes at the time. So they gave some of that hose to Sherborn. So based on some of the testing issues that we've had, and the fact that we still have a good chunk of that 30-year-old hose around, I think both to make up for what we've lost in the testing and to replace the stuff before it fails at a fire or for testing next year, that's really why we're looking to replace some of that hose. And again, it really doesn't owe the town anything at this point. It's certainly outlived its useful life. So those are the two requests.
Great. I guess first, I guess I want to open the floor to any public comment or questions. If anybody, and if you have something, if you could try to use the raise hand feature in the sort of chat box or whatever, because I might not see you on the screen. But if anybody from the public has any questions or comments for Zach Ward regarding either of his capital requests. All right, seeing no public comment or question, I will open it now to the advisory committee to ask about either thing. So I guess I'll start first about the command vehicle. One thing is so you had indicated that you expect that the actual town spend will be around 15,000 net for that, right?
Yeah, and
But
just to go, sorry, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, but your currently the capital request is it for the full amount of the new vehicle?
Yeah, so I don't really know how that's going to work. So at the capital budget meeting on Tuesday morning, Joe Shanahan actually, in the spreadsheet that they use to track the capital request, lowered our amount to what the difference would be.
Yeah.
So I think he put like 20,000 in there just to be conservative.
Yeah.
And I do know that as a trade-in, it would get 24. I think if we auction it off, we'd get a much better number. And I'll tell you why. It's because if we trade that vehicle in, they're not going to sell it like it is, like an emergency vehicle. They're going to strip all the lights out of it. And they're going to, so there'll be holes in the body. It's got a weird paint scheme to begin with. So that the market for that would be lower than if we were to put it on the auction block and sell it, hopefully. And I think that would get picked up, I think, by a fire department in the south or in the western part of the country. I mean, we just sold engine 2 in June or so. That went to Maryland, so some of our vehicles do go significantly far away.
Okay, but you do know that at a minimum, the existing vehicle will get you 24 in a trade, right?
At a minimum, yeah. And I
Right.
expect a lot more. So,
so I guess this might be a question then for Sharon and or Heidi as to, in these situations, do we typically reduce the capital request to what we believe the town's net spend is going to be? Or do we usually stick with the full amount of the vehicle? So I don't know if Heidi Doyle and Sharon McPherson, I believe you're both on here. So if either of you has any input on that, that would be great. Or anybody from advisory who knows the answer to that.
Steve.
Yeah.
This is Dave Williams.
Yep.
You can do it either way that you prefer. It's just one might short the the ability to purchase something if it doesn't come through.
Right.
But I tend to budget the whole thing because it presents a real number to the community and gives an authorization for that amount. I mean, we're always trying to lower the cost of whatever we bring in the capital budget. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to, I certainly have that same general philosophy. The reason why I ask about the trade, if we know that at minimum that the vehicle is going to bring us 24,000 in trade, like that presumably is like a quoted number, right? That we can count on.
Yeah, that's an actual trade-in quote per se
Yeah.
But that's
from the
how
company that
long.
we'd be buying the Tahoe from.
I don't want to get into this, talking to the chief about it, but I don't know how long that quote is good for or when what the timing is. I trust the chief on that. That he's handling it correctly, but I just wouldn't, I wouldn't
You
lower
wouldn't lower the
an
total
amount.
date, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't go to the bank on anything.
Yeah.
Because you still have the leeway once the deal actually happens to actually reduce the capital outlay to whatever the real number is, right? So
Yeah, you can always I can't remember what the word is. It's pullback basically. You could reduce the authorization at some point if that happens, or it's just going to lapse if it's not being used.
Right. Okay, Peter, do you have any sort of input on that?
Yes, for the warrant and at town meeting and for our advisory, we should go for the higher number to actually purchase the truck. And then you can always in advisory mention the potential trade. And then when the transaction occurs, that's when you actually know. We hope it will be simultaneously or very close to each other, buying and selling the new and old one, so that the debt requirement will be known after the transaction.
Right.
But to tell the voters, here's the
Yeah.
maximum amount needed to get that vehicle with contingencies for trade-ins.
Yeah. And Zach, I apologize if you went over this, but what would your estimated life of the new vehicle be?
Based on the mileage and just seeing some of the vehicles around us, I would estimate about 10 years.
Okay.
Up to 10 years, I think we get 9 or 10 years out of it.
Okay. And the hoses, what's the lifespan of the hoses?
It's usually 20, unless something bad happens to them, like they get, run over by a Mack truck or something,
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
We bought that other command vehicle, I don't know, fairly recently, and now we decided it's not really meeting our needs. Are we sure that what we're doing now is really the right answer, or are we going to be sitting here doing this again in 2 years saying, well, we bought this, but it's not really right, so we're going to do it again and again and again? I mean, how confident are we that this one's the right answer?
It's a really, I can answer that, Steve, if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a really fair question, Natalie, and a good one. So, the vehicle that we have now is, I would say, very unique. The one that we're moving to is kind of the style for a lot of the reasons mentioned by like the area fire chiefs. Most fire chiefs in Mass, and I've actually, I've seen that same setup work at incidents like 100 times, you know what I mean? So I'm pretty confident that the new setup would work and it would be a heck of a lot more effective. You won't see us back here
Stephen,
you won't see us back here in 2 to 5 to 8 years for a different setup,
Stephen, can I add something to that?
Yes, go ahead, David.
At the time, I believe that there were a few that were informed about the personnel related issue with the vehicle, and I'd be more than happy to talk to Natalie directly about what that was. So there was more than just operational about that vehicle.
And I guess to me, also part of it is the fact that the existing vehicle is, I mean, a serious gas guzzler. So, we do end up basically burning fuel just by keeping this vehicle. So seeing the fact that there is probably a net savings each year, just based on fuel alone, to me, it does seem like financially a prudent thing to do, even though there's still presumably several years of useful life in the existing vehicle.
And I think there are other savings too, Stephen. I mean, if you look at the tires for the Ford that we have now compared to the tires for a Tahoe, there's certainly a different cost. You know what I mean? We get some pretty mean tires on the truck now, so to replace those and that size tire, and a lot of other things like that. Some of the maintenance costs I would expect to go down as well. And I mean, you're getting a vehicle that's basically 5 years new right off the bat. You know what I mean? So I agree with you. I think there are a lot of sort of net gains.
Anybody else from advisory have any comments?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. So is this already spec'd out with all the equipment that you need, or are we also buying lights and radios and all that?
That's fully spec'd out. So the quote we have is, and it's a state bid quote, it's 43 and change. I left a little wiggle room in there, just because we may have to add another mobile radio for the back, and that would cover that. I know we would, and the reason I know we would now, and the reason being we had a mobile radio sitting in the station that I thought I could just throw in, but it's really past its useful life. So.
Okay, and this is a new model, not a used?
It's a new model, yeah.
John Higley sent a message to the chat to everyone. He says, seems like move to fuel efficiency. Is there a depreciation forecast that favors now rather than later?
A depreciation forecast. I mean, I think a couple key things are this. I mean, obviously every year, and as you saw with the police cruisers that you bought through stabilization, because there was going to be an increase in the price the following year. So I think the clock is ticking on that. And obviously as we use this vehicle, the value is going to go down, so I think, and that's why I brought this forward. I think it's sort of a good time to make the switch.
All right. Does anybody else from advisory have any questions or comments about either the command vehicle or the hoses?
Zach, have you reached out to the town where our former fire chief went to see if he's interested in the vehicle?
That's a good question.
I reached out to him. I see him, and I actually just saw him at a live burn training. We burned a house down in Millis on last Thursday, and yeah, I don't think it's tough to be, for a town like that to buy it similar to our system. They'd have to come up with an article and appropriate the funds kind of on the spot. But I don't think there's a.
He could dust off his old PowerPoint.
Say that again.
He could dust off his old PowerPoint.
Yeah.
It was my understanding, this is David again, it was my understanding that they have, other financial challenges that they're dealing with that we haven't had to deal with. So.
One other thing that for each of the capital requests also that I'd like advisory to discuss at least is the funding for said items, whether it's going to be excluded debt or if it's going to be free cash. And this is, it's an issue that, you know, it's been brought up recently because of the S&P report on the town and the whole trying not to use free cash to decrease the tax rate thing. So generally speaking, my opinion would be that because of that report, we probably should be trying to not use free cash for any of the capital items. I'd say that these would be possible exceptions because of the, you know, really fairly small number. But I would like to hear any input from advisory and then also from Sharon and Heidi about sort of opinions on free cash versus debt for each of the capital items. So for these fire department ones, what does everyone think?
I think cash is so cheap right now. Like, I think we borrow everything we can.
So do you mean interest rates are so low? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would not use free cash. I would just borrow.
Yeah.
Also, capital matches the life of the asset with the debt so that future generations of taxpayers bear the burden of that asset versus a one-time use of free cash.
All right. So it does seem like there is at least some movement support for using borrowing for everything, which is generally my opinion. Does anyone from advisory have a counter opinion in terms of preferring to use free cash for the smaller items?
I would agree with you and Brendan. Steve, I would borrow as much as we can.
Okay. All right, that was easy. All right, so if there are no more questions or comments for Chief Ward about his capital items, I believe that we are done with you, Zach.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry
All
for
right.
the technical difficulty there.
Oh, no problem. That's what these preliminary ones are for. You don't want that to happen during the public hearing
It's
or
the
town
challenge
meeting.
of the times we're in, you know, so thank you.
Yep. All right, up next, we have David Bento to discuss the police department cruisers. And Dave, if you have a presentation, I believe you should be able to screen share it right now.
Okay, I do not have a screen share. I can certainly have something to put up at town meeting time if you like, but my request for FY22 is 2 cruisers. So, you know, it's kind of the same thing we talk about every year. The difference this year, and I did mention this during my proposal to the Capital Committee a couple of weeks ago. What I'm looking to do is purchase a marked cruiser and an unmarked cruiser, but in return get rid of 3. So normally we buy one, we trade one. This time I want to get rid of 3 and reduce the overall size of the fleet, which is something that I have talked to advisory members in the past about. So I was hoping that was something that you would appreciate. The 3 cars that I'm looking to get rid of, one of them is a fully marked car that's a 2016, and it's already got 90,000 miles on it. So by the time, you know, as you know, July 1 starts the new fiscal year, but by the time the cruiser we actually take delivery, typically it's in the fall. This year it was really out of whack. They kept blaming COVID, the place that did the upfit. We didn't actually get our 2020 Tahoe until December. And that car's already got 4,300 miles on it. So we got it, I think, December 30th. So in 2 months, we got 4,300 miles on it. So again, the one that I'm looking to get rid of the most would be the one with 90,000. That's a fully marked car that's in service almost daily. The other cars, one is an unmarked, that's a 2010, and that one's already got 100,000 miles on it. And the other one is a 2013 Chevy Impala that's got 80,000 miles on it. And the proposal that I made for the two replacements was 99,000, and that reflects the trade of two cars. The third car we actually purchased through Odessa Auto Auctions, and we utilized asset forfeiture money. So that money was money that was seized from drug cases. So the rules of that program are, if you buy something and then sell it, the money has to go back into that. And we're not talking a lot of money. It's a 2013 Chevy Impala, pretty stripped down car to begin with, and it's got 80,000 miles on it. My guess is if we run it back to the auction again, we'll probably get $1,000 or $1,500. So it's not a big money maker for us, but what it does is it takes it off our maintenance line. And right now, we're spending a lot of money on some repairs. Just in the last several months, we've had 3 big repairs. One of them was $1,100, one was $1,200, and the other one was a little over $1,300. And that's more than a third of my maintenance budget on 3 repairs. So, by getting rid of these older cars with the higher mileage, I'm hoping we can, stay within our maintenance budget. I'm not looking to reduce the maintenance budget because right now, unfortunately, I'm running over budget on that because of these 3 big repairs. So, it's a combination of, cost savings on the repairs, but it's also a matter of having vehicles that are reliable and safe and can get the officers to the calls and do the job that we have to do. So again, I'd be looking at 1 marked Chevy Tahoe and 1 unmarked Chevy Tahoe. And the marked unit would be about $56,000 and the unmarked would be about 43. And then again, that does reflect what we'd be getting on the trade, which would be probably around $2,000 a car. And that's about it. If you have any questions.
Dave, how do we get our money on more of that drug money? Our hands on the money of the drug money. Hands on the drug money.
Well, you tell us where there's some illegal drug activity and we'll do our best. What happened, Peter, was many years ago, we had an officer that was in a task force and we utilized a lot of those cases to bring in some money to the town, and a lot of they weren't even Sherborn cases. He was working cases all over the state, and we got a percent here, a percent there, but there were some very large cases, and it added up. So over the years we've been able to buy a lot of equipment and in a vehicle, and it served us well. But right now that account's pretty well depleted.
And so you're replacing 3 with 2. Are these going to be take-home vehicles, or are they?
Well, the marked unit would definitely not be. And I don't really want to speak for what's going to happen when a permanent chief comes in, but it could very likely be that the new unmarked Tahoe becomes the chief vehicle, and then the older Tahoe that we have, becomes the detective vehicle. Because one of these vehicles that I'm looking to get rid of is the daily driver for the detective. So, how the assignments go, I'm not exactly sure. But it would be used it's an administrative car. It would not have the prisoner cage. It would not have the radar unit. It would only have the minimal amount of lights, not the light bar, that sort of thing.
And so what would you estimate to be the life of the 2 new vehicles?
I would say the marked vehicle would be at least a 5-year. And then if the admin vehicle, I think regardless of how it's determined, whatever the new chief determines, if it's a chief vehicle or detective vehicle, I would say it's easily in the 10-year range. Similar to the last vehicle that I drove was a little over 9, and that was a Ford Expedition. Like the fire chief just said, the Chevy Tahoes, if it's being used in a limited administrative capacity, I think 10 years is very reasonable.
And then I know.
Sorry, Stephen.
No, go ahead, Jane.
I was just gonna ask how many cars total we have in the fleet, or will when we get rid of the one that's
So
coming
right
up.
now we're at 10, and this would bring us down to 9. And I think that still serves us well with the increase in some of the staffing that we've done, and we've been able to have more cars on the road. Again, that's one of those things we did plan on, but I think we can still handle everything we need to with 9 vehicles.
I believe that there was a sort of like vehicle replacement schedule that was sort of mapped out for the police department. At least I think that the previous chief had one or was working with one. So are these sort of like part of a scheduled replacement, or is this kind of based on your evaluation as the interim chief of where the vehicles are at right now, and this makes sense?
I'm not sure where this falls in with the previous plan, but it certainly made sense to me. I think nowhere on the previous plan were we looking to get rid of 3 cars in 1 year. That was something that I came up with, but I think, like I said, it works. And the capital committee did ask me to still come forward with a longer range plan, and I am in the process of working on some things for them. So I will try and forecast out how some of these other vehicles are going to line up, because some of the ones that I did not mention that I'm hoping to keep, we have some higher mileage vehicles there as well. We have a 2015 Tahoe with 64,000 miles. We have a 2015 Tahoe with 71,000 miles. That's kind of falling into, maybe they make it to the 10-year mark, and that would be great. We also have some Ford Explorers that are in the 45 and 50,000 mile range, and they might be due maybe in a couple of years. We got away from our previous plan, which was we would buy 2 cars 1 year and buy 1 car the next year and sort of rotate. In the last 3 years, we've only bought 2 cars, so that kind of threw out the old plan. But I get it also. If your plan is, if it's working without buying the extra cars, then I'm all for keeping the ones we have. But the ones that I've identified here, I think those should definitely go. And again, we'll still be utilizing them for the next 6, 8, 9 months before we actually replace them. So by the time they're ready to go, they're going to be pretty well done.
Thanks. Peter, did a capital budget vote on this item, or did you just discuss?
No, we just grilled the chief as best we could.
I believe Capital said it passed the sniff test. I wasn't sure if that was a official term, but that's what they said. So
that was for drug money that we were.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can't catch the bad guys without the cars, Peter. So we'll do our best.
All right. Any other questions or comments from? This is like a $450 medical grade headset. And this is what it does. All right, sorry. So what do you call it? Any questions or comments from advisory or the public for the chief? All right, seeing none, I believe that we're done with you, Dave. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, next up, we have the town clerk regarding amending the general bylaws regarding dog registration and licensing.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Sorry, my video doesn't seem to be working. So, but basically I'm hoping that this is just going to be a simple it's just clarifying language for the dog licenses in terms of renewals. It's not mentioned in the previous, in the bylaw that we have right now, that the penalty is for renewals. So basically, that's all this language does. It just clarifies for residents that the penalty is for renewals. And then actually it changes that the last day will be, to license a dog will be March 1st or the next business day. If it falls on a weekend, it would be like a Monday, if March 1st falls on a Saturday or Sunday. So I'm hoping that this will just be part of a consent agenda. It's just simple language change, that's it.
Jackie, the last revision to the dog license, we moved the date back, didn't we, to March 1st? It was.
No, it was originally, it was originally like a few years ago, it was like February 14th. And then it was extended to the end of February, but I find that just kind of difficult because February is a short month. There's leap year, and it's just, I just think for clarity issues, the last day to license the dog, March 1st, is clearer to residents, and also just allowing for, you know, situations for weekends. Like for instance, if taxes are due on a Saturday or Sunday, they're always allowed to be due on Monday, on the following Monday. So I would like to change the dog licensing bylaw to be in line with that.
All right, that seems pretty straightforward. And just to be clear, there's no financial ramifications for the town on this, right?
No, not really. As you're pushing it out by one day, but unfortunately, we always have about 150 to 200 dogs that aren't licensed by the deadline. So that would probably, unfortunately, always be the case, no matter what the date was.
Any questions or comments from the public about this change in the bylaw? All right, and now advisory, any questions or comments? All right, I think should be it for that. Thank you very much, Jackie.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next we have a feasibility study for the senior center, and I believe Chris Winterfeld actually is going to present this rather than Sue Kelleher.
Yes, so we are putting this warrant forward because I think everybody who's been on advisory and on the select board knows we have been looking for years to establish a senior center for our senior community. And we voted on at our last council meeting to go in front of the town to try to hire a professional consultant service to do a feasibility study to get us going in the right direction. So that's what our warrant is asking for. We've done some research, and we did find a consultant service that has done feasibility studies in several towns in Massachusetts. And they've done both research on rehabbing senior centers and researching senior centers that don't exist yet that are hoping to exist. So, and actually tomorrow night we're going in front of the select board, and they will come and do a little presentation. So hopefully we can get the town to approve of a $40,000 feasibility study. We've also had our director look to Sue to wait, I have my notes here. Ask for the reserve fund if that's possible to get some money from the reserve fund to fund this. So that's kind of what we're looking for, $40,000 to, that would cover the cost of our feasibility study.
So the draft warrant has your ask as being funding for architectural study for $10,000. So I assume that this is different now, right?
That was pulled back. I don't know if you've seen the new warrant. We had to pull that language back and reword it.
Okay, I don't think I've seen the new.
Jeannie had updated the new warrant today and will be distributed tomorrow.
Okay.
I can send it right now.
Oh, okay. So can I just add something, Chris?
Yes, please do, David.
Basically, if they're looking to have, they have a proposal for up to $40,000 for this study, and it can be the consultant believes that they could get it done by June 30th. So I recommended that they make a request for a current year reserve fund transfer to take care of it in the current fiscal year. And if that reserve fund transfer request goes through, then there can be no action on the warrant article when it goes to town meeting, if it's still in the book. And I say that because there are two options for in the warrant. This could be placed as a single line under the capital, like the beginning of a capital project, or it could be its own standalone warrant article. So I believe that it should be not a standalone warrant article, and it should be in the list of capital items where people would normally look for capital items. And the selectmen will be discussing that tomorrow night. It's really their call on how it needs to be, or how they want it to be presented in the warrant. Right. So if advisory had any preference, it would be good to know that, whether they would rather have it in the capital list or as its own separate standalone article. And also we'll try to get the reserve fund transfer request on one of your agendas as soon as possible. But you could talk about that if you wanted to. I know you can't take action on it tonight.
Yeah. So you had said that, so I guess one question about this consultant, presumably this consultant is on a state approved list. So you don't have to get like three quotes or anything like that, right?
Because of the dollar amounts involved in recent changes with the procurement laws, they really increased the requirements about the three quotes. So I think it's up to 50,000. You're required to seek three quotes. However, there are different circumstances in this where you have a recognized expert and brings expertise to the table, and they also are a firm that can do the architectural design and be project managers on a construction project. So those are usually those types of designer and architects are usually exempt from procurement laws. Okay. So that towns can choose the person that they that they feel is best suited to to take care of those needs, not the lowest bidder.
I see.
What is the scope of this study?
Basically to figure out if what the options are for the council to put a building. We had gone to a couple of the new developers on Coolidge Street, and there wasn't enough room for us there. We asked for some temporary space. So basically to see if the caustic property is a possibility, or if we could maybe utilize another building in town that could house the center. So basically just to get some information as to what we can do.
Sue, aren't they also looking at having discussions of what the actual needs are?
Yeah, yeah,
To weigh in on that?
yeah, they're
Okay.
an assessment.
Yeah.
So there'll be a needs assessment, and then they will also essentially look at all of the potential town options for a center. They're not just focused on one site. Is that true?
No, that's right. And in fact, we could ask them to do, as 4 sites if we wanted to, and then they would eliminate those that would not be optimal. And then they actually come down to probably 1 that would be the best fit for us.
And
I know there were some issues at the caustic property related to the water and the well, and would this firm have the kind of expertise that would be able to analyze those aspects of what's going on at caustic?
Yes, based on what they sent us the study that they did at Sturbridge, and they did deal with a lot of those same issues. So they would be able to do all of that in their study. I would say, tune in tomorrow night and we'd find out a lot more of what they can do. A lot of it is fairly technical. They have all kinds of engineers that they work with. And so, yeah, that's their expertise. That's what their capabilities are. Yeah.
And were there any other firms that we considered, or?
The rest of the information that I got was pretty much based on towns doing their own feasibility studies. This firm hired so many different engineers. They did hazardous material engineering, structural engineering, cost consulting. They seem to have like all kinds of things in their bag of tricks that just were all encompassing. So, and to do it in this timeline where it doesn't stretch on for years and years, I just thought was phenomenal.
I don't know if this is a question for Heidi or Sharon, but if this were to become a capital item rather than a reserve fund transfer, is this something that would be bondable because it would be, part of a larger construction project potentially, or not?
I think
I believe. Oh,
the
go ahead,
best-
David.
Well, I was going to say Heidi's probably the best one to comment on that. And I think she just started talking and I talked over.
go ahead, Heidi.
Sorry. I think we just did the engineering for the Pine Hill Access Road that we were borrowing. So I would think this is a similar project.
I don't actually remember if it was Chris or David that mentioned that something about June 30th being a reason why we might want to try to get it in this fiscal year. But is there, is that, do we miss out on something if we push it out to town meeting and, say, sometime in FY22 that this gets done?
I think we were only thinking that the COA has been patient for 10 years and the last year has been not great for anyone. So they just want to get started looking at this and put the baby to rest if there are no good options. So that's why we thought it would just be better if they could get it done in the current year. If they had come back and said, no, there's no way we can complete it in the current fiscal year, I wouldn't have recommend trying to do it through a reserve fund transfer.
And do we know, Sharon, what is the reserve fund at right now?
Yeah, we haven't tapped it. It's 300,000 still.
It's 300,000 right now.
Yep.
And we're not aware of any other impending things that may require reserve funding, right? At least I'm not aware of anything. All right, I guess first I'd like to open up the floor to the public for any comments. I see Stephen Constantine has a hand raised. So did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just had a thought. Are we looking at possibly partnering with another town so we have shared costs, so it's not falling on us like Dover?
Well, Dover is onto their own, they well into their own senior center issues, and they're constructing a former school right now. They've approved that and they're on their way.
This study isn't specifically looking at the other towns. If we were going to look for an arrangement for like a regional sharing of a facility, we would be using MAPC, and they're the planning commission that we belong to, and they would help give us a grant to study looking at regionalized facility. But it has been looked at unofficially and talked to other towns, and we also tried looking at regional fire and regional I think we had looked at regional police. I can't remember. There was one other item that didn't work out when we did go through an MAPC grant, and spent a lot of time trying to work with some other communities to get something done. And then looking at a recent regional effort between, I think it was Ashland, Hopkinton, and one other town. It went on studying with the issue for 2 years, and I think there was only minimal amount of crossover between the departments that they actually consolidated. But ideally, if there was a feasible alternative to sharing a town, that's something that should be considered. But so far, anybody that we have talked to has not expressed any interest. But I think if we had the study, we would at least have some sort of data saying that whether it looks appropriate for us to be doing it on our own or not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments from the public? All right, I'm going to bring the discussion back to advisory. I guess the questions that I have then would be, okay, one, is this something that we would prefer or recommend as a reserve fund transfer for the current fiscal year versus putting it in the warrant for next year? And then if in the warrant, is it in capital or is it in its own or article? I think my gut feeling, my instant opinion is that this feels like something that the town deserves to discuss and vote on. So I would, my first thought would be to put it in the warrant, and then to put it as a capital item as it is now, rather than as its own warrant article. But I would open the discussion to all of advisory. What do you all think?
I would discourage the reserve fund transfer due to not being urgent or emergent. I know they've waited a long time and had a few failed efforts, but it is a town-wide issue, and the voters should have the opportunity to weigh all the pros and cons for the feasibility study. Most feasibility studies will come back and say, yes, you need a center, and then here are your options on how to get it. I doubt they'll come back saying, no, you don't need a center. And then from a capital perspective, this is all part of a capital the first part of a capital possibly plan, if we were to build, renovate, or convert an existing structure. So it would fit within a capital project.
Agree with Peter. I mean, the use of the reserve fund, my understanding was that reserve fund transfers were really for, emergencies that could not be foreseen, not just, because you decide that the time is ripe to, to engage a consultant for something. So I'm not 100% comfortable that this would even be an appropriate use of the reserve fund.
I agree. I agree with that. Non-urgent or emergent in matter.
Any other comments from advisory or counter opinions to basically what I think Jane and Peter and I have all said, which is this does feel more like something that deserves to go into the town meeting for wide discussion and voting as opposed to a reserve fund transfer? All right, so I believe that's, I guess that's where we stand right now. Obviously, we're not taking any particular action or vote on it. Will David, Jane and I will probably try to be present at the select board meeting tomorrow, but I'm, usually on Thursdays I am otherwise occupied. So I'm sort of just have an earbud in listening. So on the off chance that neither of us is able to actually speak to this issue, if the select board wants us to, can you sort of speak on our behalf? I think you.
Yes, we had,
where we are.
I had talked to Chris and said that, if you go to advisory tonight and discuss it, that she'll be able to report to the select board the following night what the outcome was, and right now it doesn't look like there would be that much support for a reserve fund transfer. So likely the board would follow that, but we'll make sure that they know that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the issue is one that it warrants broad discussion and input from across everybody in town basically who wants to have input on it. So that seems like a town meeting type of thing.
I mean, in the long run, having the discussion early and getting it out to a wider audience may generate more supporters than doing it through the reserve fund. But it was, I wanted to make sure that COA had all the options that they could try.
Yep.
And I had recommended to them to, let's try to do it in the current fiscal year. So.
Sure.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate that. And we've waited a really long time. So let's get that support out because our seniors really do deserve it. And we've waited a long time. So hopefully even the advisory board, and I know they do support us, but I understand where they are coming from. So we'll just do our best to get the support out. We need a senior center. So thank you.
Sure. All right, thank you guys. All right, next up we have the compression/engine brake prohibition, which again, this isn't technically a citizen's position, right? But I believe Steve Constantine, you are in some way sponsoring this article.
Yeah, that's correct. I brought it up. I've got I don't really have a PowerPoint presentation, but I've got my notes in a Word document, and I can share that so folks can go along.
Sure.
Let's see. Can people see that?
Yep.
All right. All right. So what I'm proposing is that we prohibit the use of compression brakes, engine brakes, a lot of different names for these in the town. Do people know what these are? They're, I'm sure you've heard them. They make trucks use these to slow themselves down. They make a very loud staccato sound. So what they are is they're called engine brakes, compression brakes, or decompression brake, Jake brake, and they're used on trucks. When they're activated, they open an exhaust valve under which the compression stroke ends. It releases compressed gas in the cylinders, slowing the vehicle. Why are they used? The main reason why truck companies use these is to reduce wear and tear on a truck's regular braking system, and also the engine and tires. Truck operators may say that it's a safety device if the truck is overloaded or has defective braking equipment. Most town compression brake bylaws have provision that the Jake brake is allowed under emergency situations to avoid injury or an accident. So by putting a bylaw out there saying we prohibit the use of a Jake brake, compression brake for the town, it could still be used in the event there was an emergency situation and the trucker couldn't stop. All right, so what's the problem with the Jake brake? They make excessive, abrupt, high decibel sounds. Road atmospheric vibrations. They're dangerous under wet and icy conditions. On semis, only the cab is slowed down. So the trailer isn't slowed. It only slows down the cab, and it can cause jackknifing. Discharge of unspent diesel fuel if not maintained properly, and the potential to cause environmental repercussions. I think the main focus, at least from my standpoint, is the noise. It just makes a lot of noise. The expectation is that compression brake noise problems and issues will increase as we come out of COVID and as traffic increases. So for Sherborn, hotspots are around traffic lights, stop signs, hilly areas as trucks try to slow themselves down coming down a hill. And what I did is I went to Sherborn next door and tried to pull off some of the conversations that people have had complaining about these. So main areas where the noise is being heard, traffic light, North Main and Elliott near the Pine Hill School, intersection of Coolidge and North Main, intersection of Washington and South Main and Bullard, Western Ave, which is where the Odessa trucks are, and also Coolidge and Speen. So many towns have passed no compression brake bylaws. Among those are Hingham, Ayer, Oxford, Norwell, Holyoke. And then what I've done is I've copied two examples from the bylaws, one from Hingham, and they're pretty simple. They just say you can't use your engine brake device within town limits. And again, I highlighted unless required for safety. So I think that's really important. So that was Hingham, and then Norwell's the same way. They talk a little bit more about emergency situation and avoid injury or an accident. But again, the bylaws are pretty short, pretty simple. And again, I think most people have heard the Jake brakes and understand the noise that they cause. Norwell in theirs has assigned a fine of not to exceed $300 per violation. So what's the downside to enacting the bylaw? They're tough to enforce, but a lot of laws are tough to enforce, and I don't think that's an excuse for not putting this in place, given that it's going to help protect the town against these noise. Options, I did talk to Dave Bento about this. We have a signboard that's been used on Western Ave when this has gotten excessive. And the option there is to take and move that signboard around to different areas as they're impacted. But I guess my concern there is if you don't have a bylaw to back it up, it really doesn't have any teeth in it. And then just showing some examples, Jake brake prohibited. This one on Route 27 going into Medfield says no engine brake for the next half mile. There's different ways you can put up signage for these. So that's about it.
Does Medfield have a bylaw, or do they just have signs?
I'm sorry?
Does the town of Medfield have a bylaw, or do they just use signs?
It's a good question. I don't know. David might know. I know David lives in, if he's still on, he lives in Medfield.
Peter, if I could jump in here. I did have a conversation a while back about this. And I'm not, I think I mentioned this to Stephen, I'm not really a big supporter of having a bylaw for a couple of reasons. I'm also not a big fan of the way Medfield has posted their signs. They put a sign up that says no Jake brake next half mile. So if I'm driving a truck, that says to me for a half mile, I don't use my Jake brake, but after the half mile, I'm free to go. Well, when that happens, they're going by my house and I live on a downhill and I listen to it and I hear it and my house shakes and I know exactly what Stephen's talking about. But my approach, what I would like to do is sort of maybe step up a little bit of what we've done in the past. You mentioned the signboard on Weston Avenue. That was done at the request of some residents, and it was done to educate people a little bit that we have been getting complaints and we are going to pay attention to this. But as far as the enforcement goes, I prefer the enforcement through the Mass General laws, which we have at our disposal. For an officer to go out and stop somebody and issue them a citation under Chapter 90, Section 16, which covers a pretty broad variety of unnecessary, unreasonable noises, they can do that, and they can do it quite simply through the e-citations that we use in the cruiser, where they punch the person's information in a laptop and then the printer prints out the citation. The fine is $55, which to me, I think sends a message. If somebody, is repeatedly using a Jake brake, I think $55 in a surcharge will get their attention. I think $300 is a little bit high. I don't know what you were proposing here, but our town bylaw citations are still issued on paper citations, and they're still managed through the clerk's office. It would create more work in the clerk's office. They still have the right of appeal. If they appeal it, then it goes through the Natick District Court system. But it just creates a lot more work on the Sherborn end versus if we continue to use the uniform citation through the registry of motor vehicle, it's a little more streamlined for how citations are issued, how they're appealed, and also how they're tracked on somebody's driver history. So, I have no problem putting the sign out. I mentioned to Stephen, I'm not a big fan of putting it out in the wintertime. It creates a hazard for people driving when there's bad weather. Certainly creates a hazard for Sean and his guys when they're out trying to plow. And it's also not great to have the thing out there in that kind of weather, picking up sand and salt. But I'm more than happy to put it out there in the next, month or so, moving around town. And then also the other component to this is I've been the truck enforcement officer for many years, and my role changed a little over a year ago. So we haven't been really doing the truck enforcement. So with some of the new officers that we have, I think if I gave them a little specialized training on how to deal with some of these trucks, I think we could address it. I think we could address it pretty effectively.
Hey, Dave, just a quick question. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but do you know how many citations were issued for noise, say in 2020?
I don't, and 2020 is really a bad year to look at any citations. I ran the numbers, for the annual report, and we were somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 citations total. So with, all the COVID, trying to keep officers safe and people not driving, it definitely kept the numbers way down. But I can tell you that we get complaints from other residents about noise, and we do issue citations for noise. I've done it myself. Like I said, I was a truck guy for over 10 years. And, I try not to bring my personal feelings to work, but Jake brakes do cause me the same headaches that they're causing you, Stephen. So I do pay attention to it. And I've reached out and called trucking companies before. You know, when a resident calls and names a trucking company, it is hard to catch them in the act sometimes. So a call to the office and let them know that they're being watched by residents and they're being watched by the police. Sometimes that'll be enough. So, you know, we can certainly continue to work on that with, you know, anybody that's having this kind of issue. The same way we address traffic complaints, you know, people complain about speeders or they complain about tailgaters or, you know, whatever. You know, the other number that jumps out in my head is we had over 100 reports of erratic operators over the last year for 2020. So, you know, those things get addressed the same way a noise complaint would or a speed complaint would.
Thanks, Dave. A few questions have popped up in my head as both of you have been speaking. Number one, has this issue been sort of discussed by the traffic and public safety committees?
I did talk to Brad about it. And again, we just kind of went back and forth. He had his thoughts on it and I had mine. But yeah, it's been discussed.
Has it been discussed sort of like in committee or just kind of it has been discussed by some people?
No, we just got on the phone and we just discussed.
Sure. And then I'm unclear just because of the sort of unusual the mechanics of this particular warrant article, because it doesn't show up as a citizen's petition. It actually shows up as being a select board sponsored article. So has the select board actually discussed this and weighed in, and are they actually sponsoring this article?
That hasn't gone in front of the select board, Steve, so it'll be tomorrow night.
That'll also be tomorrow night. Okay.
Yeah, normally, I mean, there are a couple of options that they could choose to sponsor it, but and put it on the warrant and then hold their support until town meeting. Or they could request, keep the article on the warrant and request some other signatures or redoing the signatures if the wording has to change. So it'll be discussed tomorrow night in more detail what the options are, whether they want to sponsor it or not.
Okay. And so then can I assume that town council has not looked over the language as written currently in the draft?
Town council has been getting copies of the warrant, but to my knowledge, town council hasn't made any edits on that. And normally, if there's a petition item that has been circulated for signatures, we have to go with the language that people had signed. So town council would advise that, not advise changing anything unless we specifically ask for an opinion on what we would like to, how we might like to amend it or something. But
yeah, I think that's why I'm confused, because of the fact that this is listed as a select board article. So presumably that would give town council and the select board the leeway to alter the language as needed. But
it shouldn't be in the checklist listed as select board sponsor. So we'll get that corrected.
Okay, so it is a bit in limbo right now then, I can assume.
Yeah, until they agree to, it's included in the warrant, but until they agree to sponsor it, if they don't want to sponsor it, like they normally don't sponsor citizen petitions, then yeah, it's just got to be discussed tomorrow night.
Yeah, we'll find out what they say
to really
tomorrow.
see what they wanted, how they want to handle it.
Yeah. All right. I will open the floor up to any public comment or questions about this article. All right. Seeing none, I bring it back to advisory. Does anybody on the committee have any questions or comments? I think to me, mostly I'm interested to see what the select board says about this tomorrow. I don't honestly know how I feel about it, especially after Chief Bento's input. It does what he says makes a lot of sense. I didn't realize that there was already a mechanism through the Massachusetts general laws that they could address this issue. So, anyways, I don't know what to think is what I'm saying. But does anybody else from advisory have any questions or comments?
Yeah, Steve, I liked where you started the comments of the Traffic Safety Committee, because there are organizations within the town that have the subject matter expertise to weigh in. And I know the chief's on them, both chiefs are on the safety committee, other citizens, Sean's on there, to at least provide a verdict on best approach or support of the select board issue. I know they dealt with crosswalks, other safety, environmental issues, and it seems like we're not following that process here. Or did I miss that part?
Right. It seems like the committees have not weighed in, and I think it also brings us to, I think next week there's going to be a proposal to merge the traffic and public safety committees into one. So, following that move, if that goes through, then it does make it a little bit easier to, I guess, get all of the relevant parties together at once to discuss. But yeah, it does. A lot of my unease is the fact that the normal process for getting something put through to town meeting does not seem to have been followed so far, and that makes me uneasy. Any other questions or comments from advisory?
Stephen, given that we do seem to have a mass law that addresses this, and that the chief thinks that that is a way to address these kinds of problems, what is it that you think we would gain by having a separate bylaw?
I guess what I'd like to do is before I answer, or I'd like to see what that law is. So if the chief could provide that, and I'd also like to see over the past year, maybe 2 years, how many tickets were issued against that law. I think that would help with getting a better understanding of whether or not we're following that or not. As I presented, you've got multiple towns that have put up with their own bylaws because, again, they're looking to protect the town from this kind of noise, this very, very loud noise. And they've entered bylaws in their town warrants for this. So I think, yeah, I don't know if that would help, or if we could get that information by tomorrow when it goes to the selectmen. Number one, what the law is that Chief Bento brought up, so we can get an understanding of that. And number two, how many tickets have we issued against that?
Stephen, if you want to look, it's chapter 90, section 16. And it covers a lot of things, but you'll see where it mentions unnecessary, harsh, and objectionable. And that's where I've issued citations in the past myself for this. The other thing I was wondering is, did you get the numbers from any of these other towns that passed bylaws? Did you get their stats on how many citations they've written under the town bylaw?
I didn't.
Okay, because it is, like it was mentioned, it is a tough thing sometimes to enforce. If you're in the cruiser, you might not hear it. You're responding to a call, someone's complaining about it. By the time you get there, they're gone. Again, that's why I said I think sometimes the outreach to a company or the education with the signboard can be just as effective. If we pass a town bylaw, then basically what you're doing is putting a sign up at every street that enters Sherborn. And I know in the past we've had a lot of discussion about having too many signs as it is. So other than that, I don't see what it would bring. But and again, our numbers sure are going to be low for the last year. But certainly I can take a look and see what the numbers are. And a traffic stop for a Jake brake violation doesn't always turn into a citation. It could be the officer educating the person not to use a Jake brake because they're near a residential area and we've been getting complaints. And
Right.
sometimes that's enough to suffice too.
Right.
Clearly,
I'm
right
just
now,
saying
with
that
the,
it's- I think
clearly right now,
having-
what they're saying, I think it needs to be stepped up. And like I said, I'm willing to put some people out there and teach them a little more about trucks. That's the other thing. There's not a lot of education for officers when they go through a police academy and go through a field training program as far as heavy commercial vehicles. It's something that I spent a lot of hours training and learning, how to deal with those trucks and those operators. So, I'll do my best to get a couple people doing that, and we'll see if maybe we can have an impact that way.
Okay, can you do me a favor in the chat? Can you put the bylaw that you mentioned? What is it, chapter 90?
It's Mass General Law, Chapter 90, Section 16.
16?
16, 1-6.
Okay, and again, I'm not trying to put more work on you and the force. I'm looking at this as adding some teeth to enforcing the law. I mean, you're right. You're not going to always catch everyone, and when you do catch people, you might just say, "Hey, look, cool it. Don't, be careful. You're in Sherborn. We've got a bylaw against this." I think just being able to say that to someone helps to enforce it.
Thanks. And Dave, you made a good point. It was actually a question that popped in my head that I forgot to ask was whether, Stephen, whether you had gone to the other towns to find out how many citations they had written on their bylaw. So I think that would be useful information if you could try to collect that before, should the select board, proceed with this, I'd say before the public hearing, which is at this point going to be April 10th, if you could try to gather that information. I'll admit one of my first thoughts as I, saw this presentation was that, okay, more signs are going to go up. Those are going to cost money. Are the citations actually going to even pay for the cost of putting up the signs that say no Jake brakes? And I, maybe easily and maybe definitely not. So I think that'll depend on some of that information. So, all right. Any other questions or comments from advisory?
I'll just say thanks to Brendan for sending out that link. So if everybody's got that, if you're interested.
All right. I think that does it for that one. Thank you very much. All right, on to the amendment to our new open space bylaw. Are we just going to do something about this
Steve, can
bylaw?
It
Oh, yeah, go ahead,
took me a while to go off mute on multiple locations. Chief Bento, just a quick question. You said something about the town when we're cleaning the streets and so on. What was your argument there? I missed that argument. Is it in that they use Jake brakes or that they don't? I missed that part.
I'm sorry about cleaning the streets.
Yeah, you mentioned when like the snow removal and
that
and
was for the
things like.
signboard. So the signboard that we were talking about is a trailer, and I can put it in different locations, but it sits very close to the side of the road. So if there's a snowstorm, it can be a safety issue with snow removal.
I see. Okay.
It also isn't the best thing to be collecting, sand and salt when it's out there. So I try not to use it in the winter. But, the next few weeks, hopefully we'll be done with the snow and I can start putting it out there.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
All right, so on to the planning board and their annual open space bylaw.
All right, thanks, Steve. Our annual open space, I like that. The planning board is proposing a modification of one of the provisions of the open space subdivision bylaw that was adopted at town meeting last August. You'll recall, or maybe you won't, but you should recall that according to state law, any parcel of land that's big enough to subdivide into 2 or more lots can qualify for development as a subdivision, as long as there's enough frontage on the existing road to build a new road and create more frontage. Basically, that's what a subdivision is, a new road that creates more frontage. The open space bylaw passed last August established the town's preference for an open space subdivision design. A convention, that is a design that conserves 60% of the land as open space or conservation land and confines the houses to 40% of the land. A conventional subdivision that uses the entire parcel is still possible by special permit if it can be shown by comparison to the open space design that it's as good or better than an open space design environmentally. So as I said, in an open space design, house lots are confined to 40% of the land. And because of this, as we were discussing this over the last 2 or 3 years before we passed this bylaw, there was concern that open space subdivision houses would be more visible from the road and maybe impact the scenic character of the town. So I'm going to share my screen. Because of that concern, we inserted a provision in the open space bylaw that's shown here, highlighted in yellow. And that is a frontage requirement on existing public roads. That is the existing roads. Frontage of any open space subdivision house shall be as required for a conventional lot in the relevant zoning district. I meant house lot. So that seemed like a good idea, especially when we applied it to large properties in town. But we have seen that this large frontage requirement creates a problem when we look at situations with many smaller properties in Sherborn. And we find that there are many smaller properties in Sherborn that could legally be subdivisions. So I just want to show you why this is a problem. With this hypothetical house lot that I've drawn here, this is actually based on existing house lots in Sherborn, but it's just a hypothetical. Say you have a 6, or in this case 7 acre parcel in the 2 acres zoning district. Typically there will be one house on it already, and it'll have, if it's legal, it'll have 200 feet of frontage that's required in the zoning district. Many lots like this actually have less frontage than that because they're grandfathered. But in any case, you can see that for a conventional, you can also appreciate that a lot of the lots in Sherborn have wetlands and they may abut some open space. I mean, there are reasons that you might want to conserve part of this property as open space. You can definitely do a conventional subdivision here, because all you need, this is like my hypothetical conventional subdivision, all you need to do a subdivision is to put in a new road. There's no frontage requirement for a conventional subdivision except enough, or for any subdivision by state law, except for the amount that you need to put in a new subdivision road, which turns out to be about 70 or 80 feet. So a conventional subdivision could easily be done on a lot like this, could be done on a lot with less than 200 feet of frontage, as long as you can put in a new road. And that's because the required frontage is gained by the new road, the subdivision road. So the existing frontage along the existing road just becomes irrelevant. You can see right away that you could not do an open space subdivision on this parcel because there's not enough frontage to have the required 200 feet on every lot that touches the road. So that's the problem that we've run into. However, we're proposing to solve that problem in a very simple way by eliminating that frontage requirement on existing roads. Now, there already is no frontage requirement on the internal subdivision road, which allows you to make the road shorter, and the lots are smaller, obviously. But the intent of preventing an open space subdivision on a lot like this was not the intent of the bylaw. So we want to eliminate the frontage requirements. That would allow us to compare the open space design and a conventional design on any given lot on an even playing field. If we were to make an open space subdivision here, for example, this is certainly not the best design, it's just my sketch. One could preserve a lot of environmentally important area for the town. It could be shared by the residents of the subdivision, or if they choose, shared by the entire town. And the question still remains though, without that frontage requirement, you may ask, how do we protect the scenic view from the road? So to do that, we're proposing 2 additional features in the amendment. One is that the driveway to the houses can only go to the internal subdivision road, cannot come directly out to the existing road. The second feature is in the setback line in front of which you cannot build a house. We're proposing to require a 50-foot vegetated buffer zone. If it's already vegetated and treed and has lots of vegetation and shrubs to provide a visual screen, fine. If not, it must be planted in order to protect the visual impact of the subdivision on the road. I should add that there are other controls that are already in the bylaw. One is that there's a 100-foot setback in open space subdivisions. That's different from the 60-foot setback anywhere else. And the second is, remember, in an open space subdivision, you can't build any more houses than would have been allowed in a conventional subdivision. So in this case, one can only put 3 houses on this lot, which also reduces the impact. So here's the new language. I'll make it a little bigger. First, open space subdivision lots have no numerical requirement for lot frontage. And the next sentence is about the vehicular access only to the internal subdivision road. You can have common driveways. This is not changed. This is already in the bylaw. If there's a common driveway to an internal subdivision road, it has to be approved by special permit. On the existing public roads, except of course for the area needed for the new subdivision road, the open space subdivision shall include a continuous minimum 50-foot wide buffer zone between the existing road right-of-way and the 100-foot minimum required setback line that's wooded, etc., to screen the subdivision. So the important thing is that there are still plenty of controls on how you keep the houses from impacting scenic roads. But also it's important to know that this amendment will not increase development in town in any way. It won't change the number of lots that are subdividable in lots. It won't change the number of houses that can be built. All it does is put open space subdivision design and conventional subdivision design on equal footing when the planning board is deciding whether the open space will be allowed by right or they'll issue a special permit or conventional. And that way we'll be able to approve whichever design is better for the town. So that's the gist of it. That's the warrant article, and I hope you'll allow it on the warrant.
Marion, I have a question about the 50-foot wide buffer zone. What is the, why is it 50 feet? In other words, why wouldn't the screen be commensurate with whatever the, however wide the frontage is? In other words, if you had, 100, 200, 300 feet of development that was across a public way, why would you want to screen on only 50 of it and the other, 50 or 100 or 200 is not screened? Or am I misunderstanding?
Oh, the screen goes all the way along the front of the subdivision. So if the subdivision, for frontage is 200 feet, it goes for 200 feet. I should have said it's 50 foot deep. And I guess we could have made it 100 feet deep, but in fact, there's often problems along the side of the road. We've got the right of way for the plows, and there sometimes are rock formations and other reasons that you couldn't put a solid vegetated area in here. So we thought 50 feet was a good minimum, but yes, we could have made it 100 feet.
But you mean deep though, not because it says wide right now, but.
Oh, I see. Yes, deep is the right word. So I think
Okay.
your comment tells us that we should change that word wide to deep.
And I might also suggest that there be something that indicates that the screen has to extend for however, from a width. I do think there should be something relating to width, and that would be that the screen has to go for whatever width is along the public way.
Yes, you're right. It actually does say that, though. Let's see if we can look at the language again. Let's see, continuous minimum 50 foot wide. This would be 50 foot deep in buffer zone between the existing road waterway and 100 foot minimum setback line. Continuous is the key word there. Except for the area needed for the internal subdivision road. So obviously we can't require vegetation across the subdivision road here. But I think the key word there is continuous.
Well, but the continuous is related to the 50 foot. So I do think you might want to have something else.
Yeah, we could
relating to the width along the public way.
We could say across the entire a 50 foot deep buffer zone extending across the entire existing road frontage, something like that. I get your idea.
Yeah, I mean, you know what I mean, right? And I think you agree with it.
Yeah, we'll play with that because I get the idea. And if you had the question, then it's not quite clear enough. So we'll work with that wording and try it out again. I'm not going to try to wordsmith it right here, but I get the idea, and I think you're right.
Marion, a couple questions come to mind for me. One, you had mentioned that in a conventional subdivision, there is no frontage requirement. Is that right?
There is a frontage requirement for individual lots, but that requirement is met on the internal subdivision road.
Right, but not on the public way.
Not on the public way. It could be, actually, it could be, Gino, help me here. It has to be either on the internal road or the public way. Is that correct? You have to have the required frontage?
That's correct. On a conventional, yes.
It could be on the, say if this lot were this wide. I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yes.
It would allow the required frontage for the zoning district to be gained on the existing road. And that would mean that the only constraint on that lot would be the size that the lot has to be.
I see. Now, you had mentioned in your revised open space bylaw that the driveways would be required to only exit onto the internal road and not onto the public way.
Yes.
In a conventional subdivision currently, does that same rule already exist?
No, it does not.
I see. So in a conventional subdivision, there is no minimum frontage on the public way, and you could have a driveway go directly onto that public way with your small
Yes,
frontage.
definitely,
I
definitely.
see. So each of these two kind of narrower lots now on either side of that, in the conventional scenario, they could just have their driveway go straight out to the road.
That's right. And they may choose to do so, especially if the house already has a driveway and they don't want
Yeah.
to reroute it. And I should say that in the open space subdivision bylaw that we wrote and got passed last year, we also allowed driveways to go to the existing road. So it's an important change that we're not
Okay.
allowing that anymore.
Okay. And um, I guess two other questions. One is like, how did this even come up? Did like did somebody come to you guys with this potential issue, or did this come up in an actual, um, proposed subdivision?
It came up in an actual proposed subdivision, which actually had been grandfathered as a conventional subdivision because it had been, tacitly improved by the planning board before we ever passed this bylaw a couple of years
I
ago.
see.
So though they were really good sports, they allowed us to use them as guinea pigs basically and go through the process of an open space versus conventional subdivision design.
I see.
So they submitted, we asked them to submit and they complied, submitted both kinds of design to us.
Interesting.
And it turned out that they couldn't do an open space subdivision because of lack of frontage. So the way they solved it before they brought it to us was they took some of the open space and wrapped it all the way around the front of the lots, which destroyed, some of the open space and actually made no sense conservation wise. So we saw what could happen.
I see.
Was
I
not
see.
good.
And do you know if any of the other towns that have open space bylaws have sort of, similar language to your revision, or is this a new, unique Sherborn feature?
The revision that we're asking to pass now is not unique to Sherborn. It brings our bylaw into line with all the other open space bylaws that are out there, including the state model. The one we passed in August, because of the extra frontage that we were requiring on the existing road, that put us as an outlier.
I see.
Among the towns. Other towns didn't have that.
I see. And what about with the vegetation requirement? Is that unique to us, or is that also sort of commonly seen in other bylaws?
I have not I've not seen that in another open space subdivision bylaw, now that you ask, but I haven't examined them, all the language with a fine tooth comb looking for it. Gino, are you aware of any other town that has that?
Not exactly like ours, but I seem to recall having seen other towns where they have something similar, like to protect scenic roads. Everything, there has to be increased setback at least and maintain the vegetation that's existing along the road. I've seen that before.
But now, are you requiring that vegetation for all open space subdivisions, or only ones that are on, registered scenic roads?
All actually.
On all. Okay. That's, I like the idea, but it does strike me as potentially odd also, because say in this proposed open space subdivision you have on the screen right now, right? Let's say to the left and the right of that lot are just conventional lots where they don't have vegetation up against the road. So now you're requiring this subdivision to just kind of like plant some bushes, like essentially right where you have the green scribbled in, but yet neither of the neighbors on either side would have anything there. It seems like an odd requirement. I mean, I understand the reasoning behind it, but also it could result in a weird looking
No, you're right. If both
parcel.
Parcels on both sides are farm fields, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, You're right on all these counts. I mean, one thing that we can fall back on always in this subdivision bylaw and all of them really is that the planning board and the developer do a lot of discussing of what's good for this parcel and what's good for that parcel. It goes to other boards. Of course, Conservation and Board of Health have their particular foci, and they don't look so much into subdivision layout. But Planning Board, according to the open space subdivision bylaws, Planning Board does have quite a bit of say as to how the subdivision is laid out. So that also protects the road. But your point is a good one, Steve. We don't want the vegetated buffer to look weird. Maybe we could put in some qualifying language there, like if appropriate for the area, or if appropriate for the surroundings, something like that.
Well, I'm a little confused though, because I think what Steve is positing is that there are houses on, either side of that parcel that we were just looking at, but there would be frontage requirements for those houses that are right on the road, right? I mean, I thought the purpose of this was because if you're doing away with the frontage requirement for the open space piece, then what you might have is, normal frontage on the left and right, the houses that are facing the existing road. But then because you've done away with the frontage requirements for the open space, those houses are like right on top of the road, or, very close to the road. And I thought that's why you wanted the screen. Am I misunderstanding?
You're right. That's not me. Yeah, the houses are not as close to the road as the other houses. They're already set back. But you're right, Jane, that was the general worry. Like if they decided in an open space subdivision to build the house right here, for example, and another one right here, they would be closer together. There's no question about it. That's right. But in an open space subdivision, the layout is very negotiable. It depends on all kinds of the qualities that we're looking for in the bylaw. Environment is one of them, recreation is another, but preservation of scenic views is another of the goals of the bylaw. So, we could argue that houses clustered too close in an area where they're very visible would not be a good arrangement.
Does the planning board have the discretion to just waive that particular provision of the bylaw in individual cases?
No, it wouldn't, because it's a zoning bylaw, but I think the language is flexible enough. It says otherwise vegetated. If the two houses on either side were had minimal vegetation, I think the planning board would work something out with the developer such that it's vegetated, but not like heavily forested type of a thing that would look out of place. It would kind of match on either side, what's on either side.
Rather than otherwise, we could say appropriately vegetated, something like that.
Yeah.
But once again, I mean, I get what your point is, and it's a good point.
And I guess sort of like in projecting how this will go over, like, do you anticipate either any pushback on this from any, particular interested parties, or do you see any potential to the town and to zoning in general?
Pushback, I can't tell you. We have presented it at select board, and there really was very little pushback. A couple of questions, but no pushback. I would say that if someone really favors conventional subdivisions when the chips are down, then they might want us to not be able to do open space subdivisions on certain parcels, but that has not been the case so far. I think what we didn't realize when we passed this bylaw in August was how many small properties actually could be 2 or 3 house subdivisions around town. And you might think, well, you know, that's just not a big impact, but if you add them all up and they're all developed as small subdivisions, it does make a big impact on the town. So we wanted to make sure that the open space, the goals of the open space subdivision are upheld, no matter what size the subdivision is. Doesn't answer your question because I
Yeah.
don't know. We haven't had much feedback.
Yeah, no, it's part of it for me is trying to anticipate people standing up at town meeting and, you know, creating a big, long discussion that that nobody had anticipated. You know, sometimes they have valid points. Sometimes I question the validity of their points, but they're still allowed to stand up and talk about it, you know? And so the more that we can nip those things at the bud by anticipating them, the better, right?
For sure. Absolutely.
All right, any other comments or questions from advisory regarding this open space bylaw revision?
So I kind of agree with the vegetation. If the 2 houses on both sides did not have vegetation, it'll, you know, that requirement sounds a little.
Yeah, we agree with that. We're going to craft the language so that the planning board can approve a frontage vegetation that fits with the surrounding area.
Right, right. And then the other thing I heard is work with the developer, but if you actually make that into a zoning bylaw, then it's not only the developer, it's you know, kind of continuous enforcement of that, and that's a totally different issue. And if we can't enforce it over time, then what's the purpose of having it in the bylaw to begin with, right? If you know, a developer puts it, but then a few years later it goes away, I think the intent of it is to make you know, these houses not look like, you know, clustered housing. That's the intent. Why, you know, it sounds like you're proposing to have this frontage. But you know, if only we work with the developer on this, and then a few years later it goes, then we're still back to, you know, looking at clustered housing right on the street.
So it would have to be enforced such that the homeowners association or the owners of those lots maintain that the vegetation if that's what's appropriate. Yeah, you're right. That's true of any of the bylaws in town, I guess. You know, when a development happens is when you have the leverage. And beyond that, you still have leverage, but it takes oversight and attention. I should say the planning board also is in charge of scenic roads. So, you know, we do have rules on altering stone walls and trees along scenic roads. So if there were trees planted, for example, along that little strip, the planning board would certainly be able to enforce maintaining them.
All right, any other comments or questions about the open space bylaw?
Can I also play devil's advocate here?
Please do.
for full disclosure, I was one of the people that kind of objected to this bylaw last year, and actually primarily not for the big lots. The perspective, the reason, my worry is I live in a 1 acre zoning. It's with smaller lots that the issue becomes more evident, right? If you have, huge houses and 40% of a 3 acre, it's still more than 1 acre. So it's no issue, right? But once you get into the smaller, 1 acre zoning, then it really becomes crowded looking, especially in our town where you'll need a driveway, where you'll need septic. And so you end up with a situation where if you look at the, would you mind going back to the one with the open space? Yes, if you look at this one, for example, if you remove that vegetation requirement in the front from the street, it really looks crowded. And again, if you're talking about a smaller, let's say 1 acre, now suddenly each of these lots is 0.4, and now it's really crowded. So yeah, so I guess one thing I'm saying is it's weird to have that requirement for the vegetation, but on the other hand, I think it's really relevant, especially with smaller lots where again, if this is a 1 acre zoning and each of these houses is going to end up being really much less than 0.4 acre and now 0.4 acre with a septic, so you have no trees, nothing, and it's really going to look ugly from the street unless you have some sort of buffering. Right. And that was my concern from last year during the town meeting, and
Oh, yeah, it's well taken, Wasim. I guess all the houses around Sherborn that are pretty close together um, have a lot of landscaping that softens the whole view. I go down Ivy Lane. I bike around and walk around the Ivy Lane neighborhood quite often now that there's snow, and I'm looking at the houses and trying to figure out on how much land the actual houses are actually consuming. And in that neighborhood, there are many that are relatively close to the road that the lot could be a half acre easily, but the open space is behind, so you don't see it. Or the open space is behind and it's wetlands, more likely, and you don't see it. So those houses actually use a half acre or less. And the feeling around that neighborhood, the houses are relatively close to the street, it's certainly more crowded than, say, Nason Hill Road. But on the other hand, we have neighborhoods that actually already look like that. So I think even within a 0.4 acre lot, one can position houses and landscape so that it doesn't look that much different from some of the neighborhoods that we already have. But your point is well taken. It is. The question is, it's a trade-off, basically. Those houses that are closer together would have a lot of shared open space behind them, much bigger than they would have had if they were in a conventional subdivision.
And that Wasim's concern was one of the concerns I had last year as well. And so I was actually, I like the buffer notion that you're introducing here. I guess I would caution against having too much of a fudge factor language around that, because even if the houses on either side don't have that kind of buffer, for all the reasons Wasim is stating, it may be that we actually do want the buffer there, because we don't want to see all those houses close together. So I guess what I'm saying is it may be that making a distinction is appropriate, even though, things are different on either side of that property.
Right. this gives us the option. This gives us the option of where screening really is needed. It gives us the option of enforcing screening where it's needed. And so I agree with you, Jane. I think it's better to have the requirement in there and, you know, back off if it looks too weird, but not take the requirement away, make it a real bylaw requirement.
That would be my suggestion, just so that we, you know, the town has more flexibility to require that or enforce that if we are trying to screen something.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from advisory or the public? All right, I think that does it for you guys. Thank you very much, Planning Board.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that brings us to the sort of financial articles that all technically are under Sharon, but I guess I just wanted to get an idea of what we knew about the supplementals, the revolving funds, and the stabilization funds. So Sharon, if you're able to go over, I guess, what information you have about them currently.
Sure. In terms of the supplementals, as of the end of February, snow and ice is over by $113,834.60. Now, we may not have all the bills in there, so I'll have to continue looking at it. So we'll have a supplemental for snow and ice of $113,834.60. The ambulance revolving fund, I plugged in 100,000. It's probably getting more like 75,000, but again, it's a moving target, so I have to keep looking at it. And police overtime, as of the end of February, we only had, let's see, what was it, like $3,000 left in the budget. So based on the run rate, I think we're going to come in about 87,000 over. So we're looking at supplementals for about 302,000.
Okay. And then the revolving funds, I know you had sent out. You're real quiet again, Sharon. I think whatever your microphone setup is, you have to be real close to it for us to hear you.
Okay, so revolving funds, yeah. Everybody got back to me with what their limits will be. And most of them stayed the same. There was a small increase in recycling committee sale of bins. The elder housing, they presented theirs. It's,
yeah.
You know,
Is that because
obviously-
of the, roof mostly?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
And then the DPW.
Oh, you're all quiet again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, the DPW police and fire used equipment, they bumped that up to 50,000.
Do we know why that one has been bumped up?
Well, it was brand new,
Yeah.
so.
We can speak to that if you want.
Oh,
sure. That'd be great, Sean.
If we there's several pieces of equipment that may very well go on there. And I mean, the intent is you turn around and utilize the money. So if we limit it too low, we'll end up locking the money up, and it may have very well been turned around and used for whatever the purchase was that it was intended for. So 25 might be too low, because if we were to sell a $30,000 truck and that was supposed to get rolled into either the purchase or the equipment on the new truck, you won't have enough there. It'll just get locked up and dumped into the general fund, and you'll be locked there for the rest of the year. And remember, that goes across 3 different departments.
So how much is in that revolving fund currently?
I don't know at the moment what's in there, but a $7,000 truck just got sold yesterday on the fire side. And So we're still in that'll come in and be paid from the auction house in this fiscal year. And it was, I think the last fire truck was 10. So if there was another decent size sale that was supposed to get rolled back into, say you figure the sale of, say it's a $10,000 truck. Say I was gonna do it on a DPW truck, and we figure $10,000 or $15,000 is gonna, that's what we're gonna get, and then we're gonna roll it back in. If the fire department already capped that out with $17,000 worth of sale, it's gonna be, we're not gonna have that tool. We're gonna sell it, it's gonna lock the money up, and if it's early in the fiscal year, you're gonna lock the money up. It'll sit in the revolving fund, but you'll hit your limit. So it'll just sit there until the end of the fiscal year, and then it dumps into the general fund. So the money's not gone, but it didn't go to where maybe it was intended to.
And
So-
have you purchased anything out of that revolving fund so far, or have you already targeted things that you want to buy using the money in that revolving
I
fund?
don't know if the fire chief's on, but we did. He had the money from the earlier purchase that happened right after town meeting in August was slated, and I'll let him speak to it, but I'm certain that he had that slated and it should be spent. Maybe the transfer hasn't happened yet, but it was spent, I think, on the SCBA's to do a match on a grant.
Exactly, Sean. So we actually just paid the invoice for our SCBA from the federal grant. And now we have to use approximately 8,000 for our match on the town side. So we haven't purchased all the equipment. We purchased the vast majority of it, but we have to buy additional bottles and SCBA masks, from the revolving fund to, again, satisfy the federal match requirement. So that we're using that for, it's very convenient that those two trucks, especially the first one, was sold, right after we got that grant. The second truck, we're planning on buying fire gear with it at this point, turnout gear for the firefighters, about 3,000, actually about $28.50 a set per firefighter.
This relate to the discussion we were having earlier about the command vehicle. I mean, would a sale of that, would those proceeds also be in this fund? And so do we need to be thinking about that?
That's exactly the concern, is that vehicle's got a high value.
I'm sorry, Sean, you cut out. I didn't hear that.
That's exactly the intent. If that plan goes through and we're going to sell that has a high value, and we may very well cap out the 25,000 for the whole year with one sale.
But wouldn't the money from that auctioning off the command vehicle, doesn't that just go directly back into the purchase of the new vehicle?
Not if it goes into the revolving fund.
So,
Right, but I guess my point was that, the capital request was supposed to be offset by the sale of the existing vehicle, right? So if you go get $45,000 in borrowing to buy a new vehicle, then you go and you sell at auction the existing vehicle, and instead of putting that towards the new vehicle, you put it into the revolving fund and buy a whole bunch of other stuff. You've sort of had your cake and eat it and eaten it too, right?
That's it. No, you presented that completely wrong. At the time, right now, everything's coming in through the revolving fund. That's where the money's coming in. So if it's slated that money needs to be transferred to that sale, that's fine. But if it comes in through the revolving, now I'm sure you could short circuit that and bring it in a different mechanism. But currently, that's the way it's coming in. So if you cap it at 25, we can only take the 25. And the rest of it, theoretically, is locked up.
But
So if you get 40 and you can only use 25, then the rest of it's going to be stuck there in that revolving fund and not have any authority to spend it or transfer it or anything.
Can I just make an additional comment on that? So just
Yeah.
as an example, Steve, right? So say we buy a new ambulance next year, which we're not planning on, but we sell, the old ambulance and we get, 40,000 for it. Okay. And then Sean sells a truck, whatever truck it is, and he gets 30,000 for that. And so you have a larger number in there. The limit on that account for spending between 3 separate departments, police, fire, and DPW, is 30,000, right? So if he wanted to take, those dollars and offset his capital, say a capital request was a $20,000 purchase, and I wanted to do the same with the $15,000 purchase, we couldn't do it in the same fiscal year. Because the cap is 30,000 across all 3 departments. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, but let's say, so 2 years ago, before this revolving fund existed, there was still a mechanism for you are going to trade in or auction an old vehicle in order to offset.
Steve, you cut out.
The cost of a new vehicle. So hang on a second. So like, for example, 2 years ago, before this revolving fund even existed, you would still have old vehicles you would replace, and you would sell or auction off the or trade in or whatever, you would auction off the vehicle and use that to offset the cost of the new vehicle, right? Before this
Sure.
revolving fund existed.
And then just a side note, for the command vehicle, I honestly didn't even consider that. I did talk to Heidi about some of the different options a while ago, and because it's kind of an unusual circumstance, I think it might be wise to look at other options for that. It's not a 30-year-old fire truck like the 2 that we just auctioned off. You know what I mean?
Right.
We haven't, to the best of my knowledge, ever auctioned anything and used the proceeds from the auction to cover the borrowing. We have traded. The problem with trading equipment is you're just giving it away.
Yeah.
They're really not giving you any value. So we're going to great length to get more value for the town in the auction. But prior to having the revolving fund, it just fell into the general fund. So there was nothing accounted for on the other end. We were just doing the right thing by getting cash back in the town. But Zach would have never been able to use that money to cover that grant. He would have in turn been coming to you for a reserve fund transfer or something else to cover the match on that grant. I wouldn't be buying equipment with it. It's usually not in your best interest to trade something. The guy that's selling you a $500,000 truck has no interest in buying your $7,000 truck. He can't do anything with it. And we're going to get, in my opinion, significantly higher value by auctioning that command vehicle, if that's what we do, than trading in. We're going to get book value for it if we trade it in. And that would be the only clean way to do it outside of doing it through the auction.
So spending out of this revolving fund, does that require approval from the select board?
It doesn't take a vote of the select board theoretically. I don't think it was written in there for the actual spending, but any of the spending that we're doing falls under the select board. Since it's 3 departments that fall under the select board.
Yeah, but technically you and the fire chief and the police chief could basically use the money that's in the fund for whatever you deemed fit without actually getting approval from the select board.
Yeah, I don't think the way the revolving fund was written requires a vote of the select board for each item.
Yeah. I mean, Do you see what I'm getting at with the, just, I mean, it's low grade, but it's my unease about how this revolving fund works. It's part of the reason why last year I had decided that we were going to punt this because it warranted some discussion and, nobody, I don't know whose oversight it was, but at no point prior to the public hearing had anybody on advisory even heard about it, and I was like, this requires some discussion and thought. Obviously town meeting disagreed with that, and so it exists, but now looking at expanding it, I'm like, okay, well, the issue here is that what is the oversight on the spending, right? And I understand from the perspective of the three department heads, requiring or needing equipment, selling your old equipment and wanting to have this mechanism to make that more expedient. I fully understand that, but it's not like the money that you would get from selling the vehicles goes poof into thin air, right? It goes into the general fund. From my perspective as an advisory chair, overseeing the entire town's um, finances, like that's not a drawback. The fact that that money goes into the general fund, right? Because it's general use, right? We can use it for anything around town. Whereas in the revolving fund, we are now restricted the use of that money to these three departments. And then furthermore, we have taken the oversight of the spending of that money out of the hands of advisory or town meeting or the select board, apparently. So that's the source of my general unease. And now seeing the limit for this fund that I'm like, I wasn't really too sure about it, and now we're doubling it in year two. I'm like, it's going very fast,
Well,
but I
hold
do
on.
recognize the fact that, okay, we're about to sell this command vehicle and we need to put that money somewhere. I recognize that, but to me, this whole thing warrants more discussion.
Steve, if I could comment, this is not a change in a single limit purchase. Anything that would fall under capital budgets, purchase limit still falls under capital budget. Like none of us three have the authority to spend $20,000 in a whack. Whether we have, I mean, we have a $25,000 limit on it right now. That doesn't mean any of us have the authority to spend that in a single limit. It was the combined limit that was the issue if we're going to hit it consecutively. And I would just say, I'd caution you that you can't spend money out of the general fund until the next year. So while it sounds like you have lots of control, you lock the money up. That's the problem. So if you're trying to do a purchase and you're trying to justify something else, if you dump it in there and then you hit the limit, you can't use it, it's gone. It's essentially gone. I know it's going to come back to the roll, but it's gone. It's out of use. It's not accounted for and you can't spend it.
Well, but I think the reason for that is that the citizens of the town have the right to vote or not, to approve or not. Right now, the citizens of the town have the right to approve or not approve capital expenditures, essentially. And yes, it does go back into the general fund, and that is because the citizens have to decide how that money is going to be spent. If it's in a revolving fund that builds up as quickly as this one is clearly building up, then at some point the citizens no longer need to vote on whether or not these purchases should be made because there's enough money in the revolving fund to cover them. So I think Steve's right. This is a fairly significant issue that we're talking about here.
No,
I think one of the differences too, Sean, is that there's an inherent difference between this revolving fund and the others, right? In that all of the various departments that control the other revolving funds, they have their own separate revenue stream, right? Which is generally outside of the remainder of the town. Whereas what is feeding this equipment fund is essentially equipment that was originally purchased using money from the general fund, or that was borrowed against the town's credit, right? So that was town money that went into the equipment that subsequently got sold, which is now going into the into the revolving fund, right? It's not, oh, farm pond stickers, right? That's basically a separate revenue stream, right? The town forest sale of firewood, right? They're just running their own thing over there, right? But this equipment was purchased using the town's money, and now what we're getting back from it, even though it's just a fraction of the original cost, rather than going back to the town, is going into this revolving fund, right? So that's there's a categorical difference there, right?
Right, so what are we spending it on? Equipment for the town.
Yeah, but I say that if you need equipment, then you have a line in your budget for equipment, right?
Yes,
And
I
then
do.
we talk about it.
Right, and you
Yeah.
don't vote on a $7,000 mower.
Yeah, but so I guess, so if you're proposing a $50,000 limit to this revolving fund, then across these three departments, is there a concomitant $50,000 decrease in the equipment lines in your operating budgets?
Well, there may very well be, but so that's the problem, is the mix. How much is the command vehicle going to sell for?
Sounds like around 30,000, right?
Okay, so if there was a $25,000 limit, what would we do with that money? Not roll it back into the purchase. And then if we turn around and sell a $7,000 fire truck right before that in the same fiscal year, the money just got all locked up. It can't be respent. It's going to end up in the general fund, and theoretically, to your point, it's in next year's.
Yeah, it'll get respent next year, right?
Right.
Based on a vote by the citizens
Right.
and how to spend
I
it.
guess, to me, granted, I'm not running a town department, right? So, but from my perspective, it's maybe not expedient, but it's not a drawback. You know what I mean? Like the money, it's coming back to the town and it's going to get spent by the town next year.
If there's a matching, wouldn't it be a reasonable evolution in the town vote for capital to state the expense of the newer capital and raise by any means, blah, 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 and then offset that cost by fill in the blank so that you can get the full value of the best market, either through trade-in, auction, highest bidder. And that at town meeting on the vote, that may be an unknown or a best guess, but it's clearly spelled out for everyone that there's a $45,000 command vehicle and there's 24 or something that will offset that in the future. And that seems to be the most transparent way of dealing with this. And then I agree, for the little things, the $500 mower, you buy it out of the revolving fund, that's fine. But I think, Sean, for those $7,000 mowers, you do present it in your budget in terms of the line item, and we evaluate that, or the tools, or the things that you need. But it's a pretty big dollar. I think what we're all saying, the $25,000 is a pretty big slush fund that, doesn't have any outside oversight.
Yeah, I'd say that if the three departments were proposing to reduce their relevant equipment lines in their 2020, their 22 operating budgets, proportionate to whatever they are right now, by a total of 50,000, we'll call it 40,000, but essentially, if we're going to use this revolving fund as a means to reduce the omnibus budget, I would be very much in favor of that. If we're just using this as essentially, it's just an extra $50,000 that these three departments get to use on top of what they've been approved in their operating budgets. That's where I'm kind of like, okay, what's, there's this little, basically you've created this little kind of like loophole here where money is being spent outside of the operating budget and without really oversight. So that's my unease, and I don't have the numbers. I don't have all your budgets in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure that between DPW, police, and fire, that there's not been a $50,000 decrease in equipment lines in the budgets for FY22. Now, if the three department heads would be amenable to decreasing their equipment lines by some amount to account for the fact that you've got this revolving fund, which is going up to $50,000, I think that's a discussion that I would be very happy to have. But
Steve, I just have one comment on that.
that's not even up for discussion. I'm sorry.
For the purchases, Steve, that fires proposed or made or committed to from that account, it's really not things that we have the funds to cover. Therefore, with us spending it out of this account, it necessitates us having an additional request. You know what I mean? It's not so much, we're able to buy things with our operating thing, like for instance, that grant match or the extra gear, because if I knew that engine 6 wasn't going to sell, I probably would have had a small article for gear. You know what I mean? Just to cover a few sets. You know what I mean? Because our operating budget can only handle so much this year, and we need to buy more sets than what our operating budget can handle. So I get what you're saying, but I don't want you to think like it's a slush fund and on our end, and I think on our end the things were well thought out, and it's and again, it's really stuff above what our operating budget covers. If I have a saw that breaks tomorrow, I can handle that in the operating budget. I can't handle a whole lot, but I do get what you're saying though.
Steve, may I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Also on reducing the budgets. I mean, if the budgets were reduced, but there's no guarantee that every year you're going to have an X number, 50,000, let's say, in that revolving fund, right? I mean, that revolving fund is going to be variable. So, does it really make sense to be expecting to reduce the equipment budgets by 50,000 every year thereafter? It sounds like the issue here is probably just, no longer maybe oversight over the spending of that. And if that's the case, maybe that's the way to, maybe you need to discuss something to potentially have that oversight. I mean, I like the idea of the fund. I like the fact that, with that fund, there's incentive to, go and get better auction value, let's say, for a truck versus, so I think the fund is encouraging, the right behavior in that way. I mean, not that, without the fund, the behavior was wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I just like the idea of the fund. And it doesn't seem to me personally like, again, since we don't know how much is going to be in that fund, it's not, the value is not going to be the same. It sounds hard to expect that the budgets will have to go down by an equivalent amount each year. Maybe just how do we, may I ask also a question like how do the three departments determine among themselves how they're going to use the money in this fund? Like there's some sort of moderation, like not moderation, like some sort of agreement between the three departments. What's the process right now for saying, I am from Department X and I want to, use 5,000 from that fund?
Well, and therein lies the problem. I mean, it's only a limited number of things that are sold. So we're obviously keeping track of, a $7,000 fire truck, that's earmarked money for the fire department. I think actually the finance department separated it, but it is one revolving fund, so it's one single limit. And again, the reason I asked to increase it was because one single sale this year may cap out the fund beyond what it's useful for. So the intent was to not blow the whole 25 on a single thing and then essentially not have the revolving fund for the rest of the year. Where some of that equipment might have gone to something, and you're oversimplifying it by thinking that there's no control. For some of the smaller items that, nickel dime stuff, if we sell a $500 mower, it is what it is. But it might be that outside of what you saw as the capital, it might be, all right, we're buying a truck. We're going to borrow $50,000 to buy a Tahoe, but we know, we have, say, $4,000 worth of a sale that we just made. That's going to hit, and, we're going to send it to MHQ and put the lights and radio in, and that's the money we're going to use. That's a responsible thing to do. Was there an advisory and capital budget committee vote on the $4,000? No, but there never is. Anything under $10,000, you're really not seeing.
Well, Sean, we do see it in your operating budget. We do see that amount in your operating budget. Here, it's coming out of beyond your operating budget. So you're absolutely right. Within each department's operating budget, we look at it at a high level, at a detailed level, and then you spend it at as you need it over the years. Here, now there's a special fund, which is based upon sale of assets, which if you sell an asset, again, I'll go back to my point, you're replacing it. And I think that's where we should align things. And if there isn't a use for, like the Chief Bento was saying, he's selling 3 vehicles and only buying 2, then, maybe that third vehicle, the $1,000 goes into this revolving fund for more bullets or something.
Right, or maybe you pin it to the specific sale, and that's fine, and you would do that with the command vehicle, say, and so it's not that there's no oversight. You just don't know the dollar amount until it's done. So it's nice and clean. You bring in the revolving fund, whatever it is that came in, can go against the bond for the future. But that's not every case. I mean, I've sold everything from a $75 sprayer. 90% of what we're selling has 0 value on the books. They've been depreciated and written off years ago. So you sell 8 or 10 things and you might have enough to buy a roadside mower or something. It was, there's no oversight to that. There's no oversight outside of me and working for the town administrator and the selectmen for a lot of the purchases I make for tools. Yeah, it comes out of a single line item, but you still don't have oversight over that. You give me one number at town meeting, and you don't have oversight over a specific line item on what I spend. If I blow up a mower in the middle of the year, I snap a plow, slam it into a stump on the side of the road, I got to buy one. There's nobody voting on whether or not I'm going to buy equipment. If I got to buy 4 tires for a truck, I go out and buy it.
Sean, can I add something on that? The select board does have a right to go into any of the expense warrants and pull any item and question it. And the same with the finance director or myself. So we wouldn't, we have the right to pull something out and then go find out more information about it if we have some sort of concern about it. But in general, once the town appropriates something to a department, we want that department head to be responsible for all of those expenses. But we do review them through the warrant process. That's all.
Thank you.
And sorry, just to one quick clarification, Sean, did I hear saying correctly that if the fire sold something, then that money is allocated to the fire or can be used by someone else? I thought you just wanted to clarify that.
Well, legally, it's one revolving fund. That's how it was written. We didn't separate that. But functionally, we're keeping them separate.
Got it. Okay, to make things easier.
To keep it, yeah, to keep it clean. I mean, it all comes right now because, I mean, it wasn't limited on exactly how we were going to sell it, but we're selling everything right now through one vendor that runs everything through an auction house. So it all comes into one bucket. But we're keeping it separated out. We haven't sold that much stuff since we created it. But we've sold some pretty significant pieces. In size, it won't always be that big, and certainly the command vehicle will be the highest thing you'd ever expect to sell on that. But I mean, we have a backhoe that we're probably going to shed off in the next year, and that'll be pretty substantial.
Now, wouldn't those proceeds be used to fund the replacement of the backhoe?
No, because of the lag. The replacement of the backhoe was a completely different piece of equipment, so there wasn't a tie to it. And it'll be a couple fiscal years different. The backhoe's still here. It was somewhat replaced by the wheeled excavator that's been bought and probably bonded by now. And it'll get sold in all likelihood next fiscal year.
And would those proceeds trip capital greater than 10,000 or under 10,000?
No, I don't think it'll be. No, I don't think it'll be greater than 10 in the condition it's in.
So then it sounds like the revolving fund should be set at 30,000. 10,000, which is the limit for capital for each, and it can go on autopilot then.
Well, that's not what I asked for.
No, that's what I suggested.
What are we going to do if we sell the command vehicle for $42,000?
Well, again, I want to go to the voters and specifically say, can we raise by any means X amount and then have an offset for the value of the replacement? And so that's
until you sell it.
What's that?
You won't know the value until you sell it.
And that's fine. Even if it's $1, the townspeople know that that's all we could get, and it was put towards that capital purchase.
Okay, then we won't run it through the revolving fund then. We'll bring it in a different way.
Yes, it would be matching the debt and offsetting the resale value, the proceeds from the resale.
Then to be clear, that won't hit the limit. That won't affect the limit of the revolving fund. We'll bring that in.
Right. Right. So you'd still have 10,000 of your small items.
Okay.
And again, so we're using the benefit of the revolving fund for each department, and then you won't lose the value of the big ticket items by having it capped when you match capital to the resale proceeds.
Okay.
Again, that's just a thought to address all concerns.
That's fine. So what we would do is handle the things we know are going to be too high for the revolving fund. We'll just handle them outside of it.
Yeah,
Like
I think it should be transparent in the warrant article. And again,
exactly. Right, and it
So
may
that's
not be a specific dollar amount. Sometimes you have those. Sometimes you buy something you already know what the dealer is going to give you. We did that with one of the trucks, and you knew what they were going to give you, or you have a very good estimate. So you just don't pin the exact dollar amount.
Right, but there is some value that would offset what the town would float for a bond in future years. And then the taxpayers know, all right, there's value being applied to new purchases. And the departments that have a lot of equipment turnover still have the ability to use that revolving fund set by limits and the administrative oversight that exists now that David mentioned.
Okay.
Now, I had asked the other advisory members if that made sense, what Sean and I are okaying about.
I'm just happy you got an okay out of Sean. And
I like your idea, Peter. I just have a question. I mean, is it, I think if I understand what you're proposing, there would be a warrant article that says we're going to buy a new, let's use the command vehicle, because that's a real, example from this year. We're going to buy a new command vehicle. The town authorizes up to $45,000 for a new command vehicle to be offset by, whatever amount is garnered from the sale of the old vehicle. And if we said that, does that mean that that money can automatically be applied to the purchase of without having to go back in the general fund and get revoted? Is that what we're saying? I mean, if that's true, then I think your idea is a really good one.
Well, from my experience, the town council crafts those lengthy paragraphs that we all have to read when it comes to capital. And I would defer to them to be able to craft that language so that when voted upon, the mechanics work the way we're outlining it. That the proceeds of the old equipment go towards funding the new equipment. And that any taxpayer could follow that fund flow across fiscal years, if it may, or could actually see that what they voted on, the money was used for.
And I would recommend to Sean and Zach that what you guys do is you set your revolving fund limit based on, a reasonable amount of money that you think you will need to spend in the following year, right? Which is, I think, what most of the other revolving funds do. For example, elder housing, their limit went up from 280 to 350 because they knew they're going to replace a roof, and they know that the roof is going to cost whatever it is, $80,000, and that they're going to pay for it out of the revolving fund. So they're moving their limit based on what they anticipate their needs for the following year are going to be. And so that's what I would suggest with your revolving fund is to. And I know it's hard because the nature of it is that they are frequently unanticipated purchases, but as you go over the next couple of years, you'll probably get a sense for how you are actually using it, and then you could probably get a trend and basically set your fund limit to a trend.
Well, I like Peter's idea. If I understood correctly, though, that the revolving fund would be set at, say, $30,000. And Peter, you were thinking basically 10,000 for each of the three departments. Is that right? And that would allow them to make, smaller scale purchases, but, they wouldn't be making major capital purchases without it going onto the warrant and then proceeding the way that you described. Is that what you had in mind?
Yes. And as a follow-up to that response is the mechanics, and this may be Sean or Sharon, is the revolving fund capped at that dollar amount, or because and I arbitrarily set it at the baseline for capital, but if you knew you were going to sell 15 $1,000 items and then purchase $15,000 worth of new equipment, can you do that within a $10,000 limit, or is the 10,000 revolving, truly revolving, or is it just capped? Once you get to 10,000, you stop, even though you put an extra 5,000 in?
No, the cap is it's an annual cap.
Okay.
That was originally why I was upping it. I wasn't upping it to spend more. I was upping it because I thought we were going to hit the cap with the chief's vehicle. We're all trying to go to the same place. It wasn't any less transparency. I was just trying to simplify it by bringing everything through the same fund, right? And the fund wasn't big enough to bring this item through. So I was trying to increase the fund to make sure there was still something left after we bring another, an item through that might be between 30 and 40. If we don't bring it through, then it's fine. Nothing was going to change the fact that over $10,000 needs to go through capital budget anyway. Like if I bring in $20,000 worth of, say, $1,000 items, I can't turn around and buy a $20,000 item. I don't have the authority to do that, nor would I. I could buy $4,000 or $5,000 items, but the original issue, which we solved by just by still separating things. So it's, just some it might seem complicated. Well, some things you're going to bring in through the revolving fund, and some things you won't. But those will be pinned, and it's probably only one, maybe two a year, right? I mean, we have a specific article. It's a specific item. It's not going to be part of the revolving fund. So it shouldn't be confusing, and everyone can follow that trail. You could have followed the trail through the revolving fund. You would have seen the receipt coming in, and you would have seen it transferred out. But it's fine if we just keep it separate, and then we keep the limit where it is. Or raise it to 30. That doesn't make much of a difference.
Steve, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So if we go with what Peter said, right, and you sell the vehicle and you put in the article that the proceeds from the sale go towards the purchase of the new one, would the best avenue be purchasing the new vehicle out of free cash, and then the sale of that vehicle pays back the free cash? You know what I mean? I don't know.
That's a good question, because you're going to buy the new vehicle before you sell the old one, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a secondary benefit to that, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if we vote to buy a piece of equipment out of free cash, you can make the purchase. You don't have to wait till July 1st, I think. I might be totally wrong, but you can make the purchase right after the votes.
Day after town meeting.
The day after town meeting, or if it goes to the ballot, Sean. I don't know. You know what I mean?
It doesn't need to go to the ballot if it's free cash.
Yeah, you see it right, so you can make the purchase meeting a couple years ago. Hopefully, if you got the new vehicle soon, you could have the sale already done by July 1st. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it was free cash, just for that one item, it's just a thought,
No, it's a good point. And this meeting's getting pretty long, but I'll take any quick comments from advisor about that idea of purchasing the new command vehicle out of free cash for this particular advantage. Any thoughts about that?
We're trying to combat serial audit reports that have dinged us on a reduction to net fund balance because of the overuse of free cash and stabilization funds. So I cite that as a rationale not to be using free cash unless there's financial motivation that, and I won't go back to the police cruiser where it would have cost us $12,000 more if we waited an extra 2 months, 3 months, or whatever Chief Bento mentioned last time.
So you're saying you would still recommend bonding it?
Debt, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. All right. So sorry about that. I did not intend for that conversation to get drawn out so long, but I do feel like it was fruitful. Any other last comments or questions about the revolving funds as a whole? All right, and then lastly, the stabilization funds. Sharon, what is the? Can you give us like a quick overview of
Steve, your mic's messed up.
I didn't hear anything.
All right. Sharon, sorry. So can you give us an update on the situation with the stabilization funds?
Sure. So last year, because the annual town meeting was held after the close of the fiscal year, we, the money, the supplemental appropriations that we had earmarked to be funded by free cash and the police vehicle for a total of $379,185.22. We actually funded that with our stabilization account. So this year, we need to pay that back to the stabilization fund.
Okay.
So that was a very unusual circumstance, but.
But we already paid back the police car. It's when we did the 180,000 last year, it was 100,000 for OPEB, and I think 55 was intended to pay back the police car, and 25 was intended to just be a general contribution to the stabilization fund. So I think we already paid back the 55.
Okay. All right, I'll have to double check that one.
So then,
yeah, I thought we did 100,000 to OPEB and 80,000 to the stabilization.
I think that's right, but I think the intent was that we were paying back 55 for the police car and then making a $25,000 contribution just, because we like to make a contribution every year, the stabilization. I mean, do others on advisory remember it that way?
yeah, that sounds familiar to me, that we specifically needed to account for the police vehicle when we replenished the stabilization fund. So that does, but obviously, Sharon, you should double check that and just make sure, but that
Okay.
does sound familiar.
I think you were trying to repay the $100,000 tree warrant too.
Yeah, but I think that one, that was like the 25,000. I think, I think Heidi recommended essentially a payback period of something like 25,000 per year for 4 or 5 years to pay
Agreed.
that back.
But I don't think it was all transferred out either.
It was not all transferred out?
I don't know where it is.
Steve, I already paid the 80,000 over to our trusts. The 150 was transferred out of the stabilization like a year ago, and the 80,000 was paid over back to the trusts in the fall.
So the 150 for trees is in an account somewhere waiting to be spent? Is that what you're saying, Sean, that you haven't seen that money?
I've seen some, not 150.
So then where do we know, Sharon, do we know where that money went to?
Yeah, it would have been transferred to the operating fund to fund.
For DPW?
Yeah. we have a budget set up. And Sean, you should be getting reports from Deb on that.
Is there a mechanism that ensures that it's spent on trees? Because we specified that we were taking it out for the specific purpose of
Yeah,
trees.
absolutely. It's not part of his operating budget. It's
Okay.
a special article that we set up, and the spending goes against that article.
Okay, so then I guess offline then Sharon and Sean, can you guys just kind of dig a little bit and just make sure that we know where the money is and how much is there so that Sean can spend it on trees?
Yep.
Because we need that to be done.
Absolutely.
All right, so then that leaves, we still have, that means something like around $320,000 or so then from free cash will be going back into the general stabilization fund. Does that sound about
correct.
accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's all we know about right now in terms of stabilization funds, right? We haven't.
Correct. That's
We
all
haven't.
we know about right now.
Okay. And presumably then, because I know the free cash was recently certified at 1.9 million, right? But that means 300,000 of that's coming right back out, right?
Yes.
Okay. So realistically, our free cash is at 1.6 million only because 300,000+ of it that was supposed to get spent last year didn't actually get spent, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So that's why we saw the increase.
Okay.
And then there's already, we know, over 300,000 in supplementals, right?
Yes.
Right. So now our free cash is down to basically 1.3-ish, right?
Yeah, but then of course it'll go up too if we have turnbacks and
Yeah.
things like that. So
But in terms of what we spend for this year, like if we also make the 100,000 OPEB contribution and some contribution to stabilization, then we're down to close to 1 million, right? Or 1.1. I'm just wondering if this is an issue, you know, given what the rating agencies have been dinging us for, or potentially dinging us for. I'm wondering if that raises any issues. I mean, maybe there's nothing we can do about it, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it seems like these things aren't necessarily spending free cash in order to reduce the tax rate, unless the argument is that the supplementals should be levied.
I think S&P would have preferred that we levied them. I mean, we did. Remember, the vote was to reduce the tax rate. I think legally they told us that had to be what the vote said.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but no, I mean, I think it underscores the fact that we need to try to not
Steve, when's your birthday? Ask for a new headset.
seriously, I'm just like, this is a medical grade dictation headset. I work with it all day long.
I pity your patience.
Yeah. No, it's just, it goes into a Word document. I can see the words that are coming out.
So 4% of operating budget is about 1.2 million in free cash. And that's like the target over the last few years, or at least, I don't know where I saw that. So we still have some room. And I think the anomaly of COVID and that in and out use of free cash for the supplementals can be explained. There's a reasonable explanation for that due to COVID. So I think if we land at free cash around 1.2 million. That's a reasonable run rate.
All right. This meeting has gone on too long, and I am going to propose that we end it. Does anybody from advisory have any objections to that? I don't believe we have any meeting minutes to approve currently, so I would like to have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, show of hands. All right, it is 10:13 and we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.